Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another monthly reading wrap-up. So this is going to be the only content this month that is not specifically tied to Nonfiction November. So let's get into it and then we'll get to all the Nonfiction November stuff. So in October I read 7 books which amounted to 2,549 pages. The first book I finished was Mailman, and that was an audiobook about this man who got laid off from his job during COVID and then spent a year as a postal service worker. And it was just basically his experience with the job and funny stories, chaotic stories, lessons he learned working as a mailman. And it was honestly so much more impactful than I expected it to be. The book, I had not heard of it. I just came across it, I think through recommendations through Libby. And I was kind of blown away by it. I'm gonna be honest. Parts of it were very emotional. Parts of it were very educational. And especially on the political spectrum, I learned a lot about how policies and politics affect the U.S. Postal Service and how much more we should be advocating for better treatment, better pay, better lives for our postal workers. And it just made me appreciate them so much more. So I highly recommend, if you're looking for a memoir coming up, you should definitely give this one a listen. I didn't read the print version, so I don't know how enjoyable the print would be versus the audio version. But the audio version was very good because it was narrated by the author and he was able to add voice inflections to his funny stories that just made it that much more enjoyable. So I highly recommend it. I ended up rating it 5 stars. It was a great experience, a great way to start off the month. My next book was the beloved Babel. I did a whole reading vlog specifically for this book. And so if you want to see my reactions and my feelings as I'm reading through the book, feel free to go watch that. It's a spoiler-free vlog, so you won't get anything, too much information if you haven't read this book before. But as you can see, I heavily annotated it. I underlined so many things in this book. Ultimately, this is a book about political resistance and colonization and the ways that the rich and powerful exploit people in order to keep their riches and their power. And there is just so many good, thought-provoking passages about what it means to be a rebel in a political resistance and the role that political violence plays in a resistance. It was just very interesting. It was so much more than a dark academia book. It was so much more than historical fiction. It felt so impactful, so valuable, so important to read, especially in light of current events and the way that our political systems are moving currently. It just really made me think so much about how I would act if I were put in a position where I had to choose comfort and privilege over rebellion and resistance. And it was just phenomenal. It was my first book by R.F. Kuang, and I plan on reading many more of her works. So if you haven't read this and you've been intimidated by it because of the size of it or the setting, because it's historical, or the fact that it's magical realism a little bit, don't be intimidated. Read it. I promise it's worth it. The footnotes in there, I have heard the criticism that the footnotes are excessive. If that is a problem for you, listen to the audiobook, because the way that the two narrators have the footnotes flowing with the regular narrative is almost seamless, and that's just a great way to read it if you want to avoid getting distracted by the footnotes. But either way, reading it audio or physical, I loved it. I loved it so much. The next book I read was All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson, and I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. It's another memoir, a great audiobook listen if that is something that you're looking for. basically just detailing the childhood and the coming of age of George as they discover their sexuality, discover their gender identity, and all the things that go with that. And not only that, but being in the Black community, how adding on more marginalization to their identity affected them. And so as a cisgender white woman, it was a very, very good and insightful read for me, because that is just a world that I am very separate from. I don't experience that type of prejudice or that type of discrimination. And so to listen to the audiobook narrated by George, to listen to their experiences firsthand, was very valuable for me, and I learned a lot. And so if that's something that you are wanting to learn more about, to hear more perspectives from people from different backgrounds than you, I highly recommend that one. Next up was The Color Purple by Alice Walker, which was on my 25 in 2025. So I'm glad to have this one checked off of that list. I did, however, rate this book 3 stars, and I feel like that's going to be kind of a controversial rating because this is a very loved classic. And I understand why. There is great commentary in here about race, great commentary about sexuality, especially in the time period that it's in. And so I understand why this would be a very well-loved piece of literature. However, the way that this was written was very hard for me to stay engaged with. You know, the way that classic books can be written sometimes, where the language is just so far removed from how we speak now that it is like a disconnect. So that was hard for me. And I couldn't find any audiobook versions on Libby for me to listen to while I read it, and so that made it even more difficult to stay engaged. And so I think a lot of the reason that I disliked this book had to do with the way that I was reading it. And so that's why I didn't like take off too many points for it, because I know that it's a well-written book. I know that it's well-loved. There is value in it, and I can see that very clearly, but it just didn't connect with me because I couldn't listen to it. And it was hard for me to stay engaged because of that, I think. I would be very interested to see the movie of it and to see how that compares as far as my experience goes. There were a few sections of this book that I dog-eared because I didn't really want to underline this book in case I didn't want to keep it, but there were several passages in this book that I really, really appreciated, and most of those had to do with religion and the character's view of God, and that was something that I really didn't expect to read about in this book. And so whenever I came across it, it was very, very surprising and very impactful for me, because I'm someone who grew up in the church and then later kind of stepped away from Christianity as a whole. And so to read these characters' perspectives on who God is and how they relate to religion and what church means to them, it was just kind of cool to see that, especially in a book that is as old as this one. I feel like at this time we weren't really seeing as much of a commentary on who God is in this way. I don't know, maybe that's a weird take, but I just found that very cool to read. So I really liked that part. I liked that our main character was going through kind of a sexual awakening, learning about her sexuality and like just figuring out who she was as a person. That was a really cool like arc to follow. So I really liked that. But overall, it was just an average book. I enjoyed parts of it. I didn't enjoy parts of it. I kind of felt like I was trudging through this one a little bit, and a lot of that had to do with like the way that it was written, the language that was being used. Other than that, it was good. Next up is Book Lovers by Emily Henry, which I gave 4 stars, and I did do a reading vlog for our next 2 books that we're talking about. So if you want to hear more thoughts, go ahead and go to that video. I get more in depth over there. But the basics, I liked Charlie and Nora. Their relationship was fun to follow. Emily Henry, her banter is always great. I feel like what I loved about this book was the dialogue and almost nothing else. It was a good book, but there were just things that I didn't really care about as much. I really only was invested in Charlie and Nora's interactions, and everything else kind of flew to the wayside for me. So it wasn't perfect. It wasn't my people we meet on vacation experience. It was definitely a heavier plot than that book, which is not, I don't think that's what I was expecting when I walked into this book, and so it just kind of skewed my opinion of it, I think. I really wanted a giggly, kick your feet time reading this, and that's not really how I felt, but it was a good book. I understand why this is a favorite for a lot of people. I would recommend it for some, but if you want a giggly, sweet romance, I don't think that this is the one. There's a lot more depth and talk about trauma, family trauma, relationship trauma, all kinds of trauma. Like, it's just a heavier romance, and that's not what I was looking for at the time that I read it. So I think that's why it didn't hit as hard for me, but it was still good, and I'm excited to read more from Emily Henry. Now, this book, this is a giggly, kick your feet, sweet romance time. Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. An easy 5-star romance. I loved this book. Win and Bo are so precious and adorable, and the juxtaposition between this book and Book Lovers is so interesting because they do talk about trauma and they do talk about the hardships that they faced in their lives, but the way that they respond to it and the way that they work through it is so much more lighthearted, and the overall tone of the book just feels so much more stable. And so I just really enjoyed it a lot. This is accidental pregnancy trope, which is a new to me trope, but I really liked it. It was so different for me, and I just really enjoyed it so much. The characters were so sweet. The writing was so fun. The spice was perfect. I genuinely just loved every bit of it. Not to mention, in the author's note at the beginning, you get content warnings at the beginning, which I feel like was very considerate, and I really appreciated that a lot. So you kind of know what you're getting into without spoiling the plot or putting yourself at any risk for being triggered. So overall, loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Probably my favorite book. No. I was gonna say my favorite book of the month, but I feel like Babel is probably the favorite. I don't know, this is up there though. It was very good. And then the disappointment of the month. Going from such high-rated books to this book was so sad because I really wanted to enjoy this book. It was the horror book of the month. I finished this on Halloween. Like, I wanted it to be a good spooky time. I'm so sad. I'm so sad because I bought this book. I bought it with my own money. And I just really wanted to love it because it's a dark thriller about a lost film. And that, I love the lost film subgenre. I love lost media, found footage, like all those things. And so it seemed like it would be right up my alley. It was just so slow paced. It was so slow paced, and I genuinely was like falling asleep reading this. I tried reading it print, I tried reading it audio. It was just all not working for me, and I got about 60% of the way through before I was like, yeah, I really don't like this. But I didn't DNF it because I was already 60% of the way through. Like, I was so close to the end that I was like, I can't just end it now. I have to know what happens. But I don't know. I didn't really connect with the characters at all. They were kind of annoying to me. There wasn't enough spook factor. There weren't enough eerie scenes to keep me like interested in what was going on. I don't know. It's one of those books that I feel like I barely have any thoughts about it because I just was not interested at all. And that just makes me very sad. This was my first experience with this author, and so if you know of other books that I might like better by her, let me know, because I'm interested in reading more. I want to give her a second chance, but I just really wasn't satisfied with this, and maybe I just didn't get it. You know, maybe it just wasn't for me, but I rated it 2.75, and that's really low. I don't know, maybe I was being harsh, but I just really didn't care. I really didn't care, and most of the time I was bored, and that just made me sad. That just made me sad. I wanted it to be better, and it wasn't. So with all of the books being talked about, let's discuss the reading stats real quick, and then we can end the video for this week. So we've already talked about how many books, how many pages. 29% of them were audiobooks, 71% of them were print, 29% were nonfiction, and 71% were fiction. My average star rating was 4.18, and that would have been much higher if we hadn't had Silver Nitrate bringing that down so much. Up until that point, it was like nearly a perfect score, honestly. Like, I was doing so well. I had some high-rated books at the beginning of this month. My top 5 moods were emotional, reflective, funny, dark, and tense. My top 5 genres were LGBTQIA+, romance, memoir, literary, and historical. 29% of my books were on my physical TBR already. 29% were from the library, and 43% were books that I have bought this year. 71% of my books were written by she/her authors, 14% by they, them, and 14% by he, him. 43% of my books this month were written by white authors, 29% were written by Black authors, 14% Latinx authors, and 14% Chinese authors. That is all of the reading stats that I wrote down. So that's all for the recap. That's all I read in October. That's all she wrote. So with that being said, it's time to get into the new stuff. It's time to get into the nonfiction November readathon things. And if you want to check out the intro video for Nonfiction November, that is already up. Here's the thumbnail. That's what it looks like. You can go and check that out if you like. I'm hoping to read a majority nonfiction books this month, as the title suggests. And I encourage you to do the same. Let's educate ourselves this month. Let's read some cool facts, some cool history, some cool stories from real people that we can learn from. Let's do it. Let's do it together. Let's encourage each other to educate ourselves. Yay! If you want to, you can subscribe to this channel. I'd really appreciate it if you did. I post videos every Thursday, and it's a really good time. We are always talking about books over here. If you like this video, give it a like, please. And if you have any thoughts on my thoughts, you can leave those in the comments below. And other than that, that's all I got for you. So I will see you next time. Bye!